Frightening proposals emerging from a UN panel over the weekend. Not only does the so-called United Nations Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration want to make immigration a universal human right, they want to make it a crime for media outlets to allow for certain types of criticism against migration. Watch.
Criticism of migration will become a criminal offense. And media outlets, and that also concerns you, that give room to criticism of migration can be shut down.
Here now is someone who knows more about this than the average Joe, I would say. This diminished EU today is Nigel Farage. He was the vice chairman of the pro-Brexit movement that raised red flags about all these issues, especially on immigration destroying the fibre of the UK. Nigel, thanks for staying up so late for us tonight. We really appreciate it. Is there a chance that with this global compact on migration that this actually could come to pass, that this type of criticism of migration could be criminalized?
Well, you were quite right to say that what the UN wants to do is to make migration a human right. What it also wants to do is to make illegal immigration legal by defining a refugee as anybody that wants to move between countries. So basically what it wants to do is to make us all global citizens, and governments are going to this next week. Many will sign up to it without ever consulting their own people. But you're quite right. The most worrying part is the section on the media, where it says very clearly that media outlets who are intolerant, critical, xenophobic or racist in their criticism of mass migration. Now, as soon as you start to define people like that, you're getting into territory where people can be defined as committing hate crimes. They want to make it, they actually want to make it illegal to criticise open-door immigration. Is it actually going to work? Well, thankfully, the UN itself doesn't have legal power. But
Nigel, doesn't this also, though, operate as kind of a framework for international human rights cases? And it ends up being a framework that, under a different Supreme Court in this country, could actually be referenced. I mean, there are a lot of justices who believe that referencing foreign law is okay, which, of course, it's not the way it's done in our country, and sadly it's been done in the past. But so that's the problem, is it becomes another international norm. And climate change, obviously, is one thing. I'm not talking about climate change, but in this case, it's a norm. So we do a lot of stuff on migration. You and I have talked about the migration, immigration, illegal immigration issue for years. So just talking about the fact that we have so many illegal immigrants on social welfare now in the United States, a big survey just came out today, about 61% on some type of social program, that would be considered perhaps hateful.
Yeah, I mean, here I am in London. There are, as we speak, 1,000 police officers in London who just investigate hate crime. And the definitions of what is hate crime get broader and broader. This is an attempt by the UN to make any criticism of mass migration something that should be considered criminal. And effectively, what they're saying is they will favour media outlets that promote their ideas materially. I mean, they're even talking about funding media outlets that support their view. No, I'm being serious, and believe me, I've seen this myself in Brussels, because the European Union, you know, that is the sort of prototype for the globalists, and the European Commission actually give money to media organisations that promote their views and increasingly demonise those that take a different point of view. And you're right, you know, the International Criminal Court, areas like that, can start to make judgments in these areas that will, you're quite right, be referenced by national courts.
And they also, they marginalize voices. You see this happening on social media. It's happened on Twitter, obviously on Facebook, YouTube channels. They're making judgment calls on who is and who is not part of the acceptable club. Nigel, I want to play a soundbite from the Grande Dame of migration, which is Angela Merkel, of course. This is just from about a week and a half or so ago. Let's watch.
Der Pakt für Migration genauso wie der Pakt für Flüchtlinge ist der richtige Antwortversuch. Wir stehen ja am Anfang. globale Probleme auch international und miteinander zu lösen.
Well, you're on satellite, so unless your German is really good, I'll tell you that it was basically just, you know, this is a right. We have to stand up for the right of refugees. Well, I believe in standing up for refugees, but it doesn't mean that every country's border has to remain open if a global entity like the UN says, okay, you got to do it, whether it's to the 7,000 people in Tijuana or to any other group.
Well, let's just remember what a refugee is. There is a 1951 definition of what a refugee is, and it's a person in fear of their life or their liberty as a result of their race, their religion, their views, their orientation. That does not mean that millions of people that have crossed the Mediterranean over the last couple of years, encouraged by Angela Merkel, were refugees. They weren't. They were economic migrants coming from all over the world, using the opportunity of the huge stupidity made by Angela Merkel. I genuinely believe, for example, Laura, that Christians living in Iraq and countries like that, who've literally got nowhere to go, they qualify as genuine refugees, but you cannot open the door to mass millions and suddenly pretend that's okay. And this is exactly what the UN are trying to do next week. They're trying to bail out Angela Merkel and the other politicians who've made these huge mistakes. And I would have thought what Mrs. Merkel ought to do, rather than defending her judgment, is to apologise to millions of German people for fundamentally changing the nature and the culture of the towns and cities in which people live without ever asking the people.
Now, Sweden's seeing its populist movement. We saw the results of the last election. We see it happening in Andalusia, in Spain. Macron is a lot of reasons he's in some really hot political water. Obviously, Brexit. Things are changing, and the elites don't get the message. But Nigel, thank you for being up with us late. A really important topic, and I really, really appreciate it. Thanks so much.